Hello, everybody. This is Echoes of War. I am Craig from the Pacific War Channel. I'm joined here by my co-host, Gaurav. How are you?
Hey Greg, great. I'm great. Glad to be on here. Looking forward to continuing with our series that we are on recording
Yes.
right now.
For those who don't know, this is part two in an ongoing series covering the Malayan campaign. You don't really have to watch the first episode to watch this one. They're all made independently, of course, but it kind of helps if you did watch the first one.
It does, I think I would just say to the audience, it does set a lot of the context and opening
Yeah.
moves, including a pretty big disaster that the British were going to experience.
Exactly. But before we jump into it, I just want to say if you want to further support the channel, please go check out the YouTube membership or the Patreon account at www.patreon.com/the Pacific War Channel. By joining either, you get access to the exclusive podcast series, early access to all the content I make, and voting rights for the subjects I will tackle next. And we are March right now. In a few days, I am going to be releasing what is the first episode in a multi-part series, which is behind the paywall, mind you, and it took a lot of time to research, but it is a alternate history of the Pacific War. It is not going to be Japan winning World War II or anything like that. It's honestly it's pretty serious. I did a lot of research, really thought this through. And the only thing I'll say is the first episode is titled The Great Naval Battle of Pearl Harbor. So I guess that's a bit of a tease. Yeah, pretty
I just
proud of
say
it.
I'm sold. I'm sold.
It's you know what? I'll just say this here. Something that's very difficult to do is to just come up with how ships are destroyed. You think after reading 50 books of like, oh, it's a torpedo in the hull here, or it snapped the bow here, the stern, or like it lists flooding, damage to boilers and all that. It actually, when you're writing it yourself and you're just coming up with it on the fly, it's it's kind of challenging. I actually was one of the most challenging aspects of it, but I desist. We won't go into that yet because today we are going right back to Malaya, and I tried to prepare a kind of a little brief summary of what we covered in the first episode. So basically, December 1941, Japan launched a lightning invasion of British Malaya, aiming to seize its vital resources and cripple the Allied power in Southeast Asia. Despite British defenses centered around Singapore, the fortress in the east, their forces were underprepared and quite overstretched, and they would be no match for the battle-hardened veterans of the 25th Army, led by one General Tomoyuki Yamashita. The campaign began with landings at Kota Bharu, where Indian troops fiercely resisted, but they were overwhelmed by the Japanese amphibious assaults. I will add, wouldn't really call them amphibious assaults. It's more like Japan just trying to show up on some beaches and fight at the same time. They didn't really prepare for that very well. The Japanese never perfected amphibious assaults, not like how the Americans did. I won't go too far
Well,
into that, but yeah.
I think just give the benefit. I'll just give this little benefit of doubt that the Americans kind of perfected it, but it took literally years
Yeah.
and over 15 or so different assaults to really perfect it.
Yeah, God, I forget the name of the military commander. I don't know if this was not a Joe Rogan podcast, but a military commander was actually explaining no one to this day 100% understands how to implement amphibious assault other than the United States because of the enormous amount of experience they had in the Pacific War. Because even today, if you look at training, let's say in South Korea, for example, because they do a lot of practice runs, they really don't know everything. The United States is still holding the cards when it comes to that. They know every single ins and outs. It's kind of interesting. But
I think I'll just add this little thing. I think when the Battle of Iwo Jima, when the amphibian tractors' first waves were moving ashore,
yeah,
the rolling bombardment from the naval support was moving in perfect unison with them so that it
yeah,
was just creeping ahead. And not to mention when the first waves came aboard, like came ashore, sorry, they while the assault troops moved up, fanned out to create a bridgehead or beachhead, the they were also creating some amount of space for the follow-up troops, tanks, and guns to even be and supplies
yeah.
to be unloaded. That's a culmination of many years of work
A lot of experience, a lot of
and
mistakes, a lot of
a
mistakes.
lot
Yeah.
of dead guys. Yeah.
Like just what was it? Figuring out the necessary technology to sense what the reef conditions were like and at what time of day you needed to go in so the tide wouldn't like screw up your LVTs and stuff so that they would scrape against the reefs. Like there's so much that goes into it, but I desist. It's a whole other conversation. That could be a podcast.
Sure.
Yeah.
It
Amphibious
could,
warfare would be
yeah.
a great podcast. But the
Anyways,
British,
back
yeah.
to
The British had fumbled by abandoning Operation Matador for its lesser cousin, Operation Crowcall, and this led the British to be unable to hit the Japanese at the beachheads, as we would say, and they quickly became overran. Now, a devastating blow came on December the 10th when the Japanese sent bombers that sank the British battleships Prince of Wales and the battlecruiser the Repulse,
my,
stripping
my King George the Fifth class battleship at the bottom of the
yeah
sea.
one of the honestly one of the better warships of World War II just
Yeah.
snipped at the bud. And it stripped Malaya of the only naval protection it had. And, well, the British were basically being forced to retreat south. But Yamashita's forces were going to exploit the chaos. Now, this brings us kind of up to date with this episode. Percival, the man in charge of the operations in Malaya, his first significant defense was going to be around a place called Jitra. And at this point, I'm going to share my screen. And I'm going to bring up, I don't like this map as much. This map's pretty good. Here we go. You can see it, Gaurav?
Yeah.
And
Once
oh, yeah,
this.
I'll state this again to the audience. These podcasts are now on YouTube, and we are incorporating a lot of visual aspects of this. So we're actually going to be going through the maps, might even make some markings on it, using Zoom, unfortunately. Might change software in the future. I'm actually looking into Riverside. We'll see. It's kind of expensive. And we're going to be putting up photographs, maybe clips, this and that. So there's a big visual component to this now. And I think it really helps because I would assume most of you Westerners listening have no idea of the geography of Malaya. So yeah, I would watch me on YouTube. And it pays more than podcasts. So yeah. But yeah, Percival's first significant defense is going to occur around Jitra over here in the north. Now, beginning on December the 11th, that's when that's going to go down. The decision to establish a stand there was part of a broader Malayan defense strategy aiming at pushing the enemy as far north as possible to protect the airfields that were still under Allied control in Malaya. And this would, also prevent obviously the Japanese from using them to launch further air assaults upon Singapore. During the Battle of Jitra, the absence of tanks would become glaringly evident as Japanese forces would quickly overwhelm the Indian defenders. One of our dear friends, evil man named Colonel Tsuiji, had observed during the combat at Jitra, and he made a report, and I will take his literal quote about what he saw. He had this to say: "Our tanks were ready on the road, and the 20 or so enemy armored cars ahead were literally trampled underfoot. The enemy armored cars could not escape by running away, and we were sandwiched between our medium tanks. It was speed and weight of armor that decided the issue." Now, that's kind of like a little tease of what's to come. But before I get into it, let's talk about the man who's going to be responsible on the Allied side for the defenses, one Major General Murray Leon. If you can, Gaurav. I'm going to
Yeah.
stop sharing
Just give
screen.
me a. Yeah, I was just gonna ask that. One moment. So General Murray Leon was probably like that one British officer that his command really was quite small. Is the screen visible?
Yep.
So this is actually Murray Leon, who's on the right in this image, with the commander of the 8th Australian Division, which would be a unit that we will get to in, I think, maybe episode 3 onwards, since they are in the south, if I'm not mistaken, Greg. So General Murray Leon was a World War One veteran as well, and I think he was a product, despite like very valiant service that he put in the First World War. You know, he got a military cross DSO. It was just that during that interbellum, Britain had its chronic problem because their army had scaled up so massively. It really stifled the ability for many commanders to really move up and gain experience at higher units. So Murray Leon actually spent pretty much the entire interbellum between the two wars at the rank of a major. right? For a while, he was like an adjutant of the Highland Infantry, and served in Egypt and India. And then in 1932, he transferred to the British Army. It was only like in the middle of the 1930s that he got promoted to the rank of lieutenant colonel, and he took command of the second battalion of the fourth Prince of Wales Own Gurkha Rifles Regiment. And he did like fight pretty valiantly as this battalion level commander, earning a bar to his distinguished um, service order medal. So just for any listener, the bar is just like instead of giving like a separate medal, say the bar means that he's won this award a second time. So that's just so it's like a second medal of the DSO. And he also then took command of that entire regiment just before the outbreak of war in Europe. And then, he was initially a liaison officer when war broke out for the Indian Army in Scotland. And the start of the war, he returned back to India and was given a brigade. It was called the Jo Brigade, which is a regional command in 1940. And in October 1940, he gets the 11th Indian Division to command and was given the rank of Major General. And as we discussed, Craig, he is going to be commanding the northern section. And ideally, if Operation Matador was to go at full force, it was going to be the bulk of his troops that had to be, executing this plan. But I think given the major problem that the British forces in this region faced was completely inexperienced troops, no tanks, and I wouldn't say very competent office leadership, and a very determined enemy.
Well
I
said.
think that's it. Like I think we can now just continue with we can see what will happen to his career.
Yeah. All right. You're gonna pull this up. Okay. Conquest from the land. There we go. Well said. I don't want to say he was kind of just bumped up, but it's kind of like what you were alluding to. World War One, a lot of things were going on. A lot of units were built up. A lot of guys didn't get an excessive amount of experience as they went through the ranks. And basically, when you were sent over here in the Far East, it's kind of like, let's put out the units that have no experience. It's a good place for them to do training, for an officer to, get a few more notches in his medals and such. And he's one of those guys. And unfortunately, he's going to be
Uh,
dealing with a real situation.
it's actually something Arthur Percival commented what he just brought up about the transfer to the provinces, I would say, for lack of a better term, for the
Yeah,
British officers.
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
It is that Percival was quite disappointed when he was actually appointed commander of the Malaysian Defense Forces.
Oh, of
He felt
course. It's
that
seen as an insult, basically, if you, yeah.
no, yeah, and he was saying that there's just two outcomes that's going to happen. One, I'm going to be because he knew the state of the army because Percival and Robert Brooke Popham, despite their bad rep for the defense of this region, they did try their level best to really start training and modernizing their army to whatever they could with the time that they had. But Percival felt that it's either going to be a really like backwater command. He's not going to get any action. It's just going to be a really quiet theater of operations that he's just going to get bored out of his life for the entire
Oh.
war. Or he's going to be facing a pretty strong enemy with really inexperienced troops and no real equipment to fight them back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Ooh,
Option
interesting.
number two. But as you're alluding to, also the British were overly confident as well, woefully unprepared for a confrontation with the Imperial Japanese Army, who had been specifically preparing for what they called jungle warfare in Malaya. Mind you, this was actually Tsuji taking Japanese. I forget the name of the island they went to. They trained on an island that had semi-tropical climate. It wasn't exactly what they'd be facing in Malaya, but it was close enough because basically what they said is these veterans who've been fighting in China, the ones in southern China, sure, you could argue it's a little close to jungle warfare, but not really. It's not the same climate at all. So even the Japanese were not 100% prepared for what they'd be facing because this is these are banana plantations and stuff. It's a very specific, like where they're gathering rubber and that, very specific
It,
geography.
it's kind of like how ultimately General William Slim would command the British Army
Yeah,
in
exactly.
India, because everyone else was focusing on artillery and tanks, which is possible in Europe and North Africa where you have a lot of open area.
Yeah.
But in the jungles, you cannot. And the infantryman is your champion. And
Yep.
that's what he focused on.
Knee motors, basically anything you can carry through the brush. That's what's going to be your main arsenal. And yeah, and yeah, the British. I mean, the British didn't have any sense of armor here either, but they wouldn't have expected a heavy use of armor from the Japanese. But unfortunately, it was Yamashita, and he heavily emphasized it when he wanted to do this campaign. But the IJ troops, as I said, they're battle hardened from years of conflict in China. So these are not greens. On the British side, they are certainly green. And Marie Leone's division appeared strong on paper, but it actually comprised only two regular British Army battalions, the Leicestershire Regiment and the East Surrey Regiment, which formed the division's core. The remainder consisted of four newly raised and poorly trained Indian Army battalions and three Gurkha battalions. Although the Gurkhas are absolutely renowned elite soldiers of the Commonwealth, these three battalions were primarily composed of 18-year-old recruits who had just recently arrived in Malaya. So, again,
You're
green.
just throwing kids into the battle.
But I would argue Gurkha kids, I wouldn't mess with them. It's
True,
like they're
true. I
Captain
mean,
America.
Gurkhas,
Yeah.
everyone respects the Gurkhas, except a certain Wingate.
Yeah, the weirdest thing, eh? Like Wingate's just has this deal with Gurkhas. He was jealous of Gurkhas, that's why I didn't like them, basically. But yeah, they are the super soldiers of the world. And additionally, like all allied forces in Malaya, the 11th Indian Division lacked tanks, while the IGA would have plenty of them at their disposal. As much as people like to make fun of Japanese tanks, in this situation they would prove formidable. Murray sought permission from General Percival to withdraw from Jitra only after a few days of intense combat. He was so shocked and taken aback by the Japanese forces that he believed they were much larger than they actually were. Ironically, the Japanese were outnumbered 2-1. And before I carry on, actually, I have a map. I I'm sorry for the quality of this map, mind you, but this is a map of the action at Jitra. There does not exist any good maps on most of these Malayan battles. This is the best I could find, at least the one that had the most detail. So you can look at that. But as I was saying, the Japanese were actually outnumbered 2-1 in this engagement. Yamashita's military strategy aimed to keep the enemy off balance by employing Blitzkrieg-like tactics. A significant aspect of his approach involved the use of fast-moving armored units and bicycles. And yeah, you heard that correctly.
Uh, I think I just want to reiterate this one point that we did discuss about General Yamashita,
Hmm.
because he has traveled to Europe, like was in Austria for a few years,
Hmm.
and spent pretty much most of at least half of the calendar year 1940 with Germany, even meeting Hitler. So
Yep.
he was there during the Battle of France, so he understood and saw firsthand the effectiveness of the Blitzkrieg tactic.
Hmm.
So that's why he was actually one of the proponents to use the bicycles to, for his men. And, it's actually a pretty good idea considering the Japanese never even landed with a single bicycle. They forcefully took it from every civilian and retailer or store.
Yep.
And because they had made a calculation that there will have been enough bicycles imported for their needs, that they can just continuously borrow. And it is such a brilliant move if you really look at it. They are moving much faster than the retreating Indian army, causing utter confusion. And since the British Indian Army is going to go by the roads, right, like the
Hmm.
major roads, and even though they're destroying their equipment and retreating, which is just standard in a retreat, the bicycles are faster, and they can actually move way quicker through narrow jungle trails than an infantryman, or they can bypass roads, which obviously the trucks and all cannot do. So
And you can ford rivers.
exactly, they would actually like be just picking up the bicycle on their over their heads, crossing the river,
Yep.
then seating themselves and moving. And another underrated aspect was the fact that they could carry more supplies per soldier.
Yep.
The
It,
British Indian troops were, I think, they were burdened with at least 18 to 20 kilograms of equipment per person, and you could actually pretty much double it with the bicycles.
yeah, and unfortunately, it was actually our evil friend Suji. He was asked, because he was an intelligence officer, he was asked to look into what would be the best ways to move through Malaya. And it was Suji who realized everybody in Malaya owned a bicycle because of the specific road conditions and the way that the layout is of the geography. They have like these, here, I can bring it actually back up to my other map. If you look, the routes taken on the East Coast and on the West Coast here, these are the main, we'll call them highways. They're not fully developed at this time, but these are the main pathways. Well, the interior of the peninsula is extreme, like rubber plantation, very, very tough brush to go through. So basically, these like dirt roads and everything, these bicycles were perfect to go over. And they estimated, I think Soichi estimated there was more than 100,000 bicycles on hand. So the Japanese,
Exactly.
yeah, they just came and liberated the bicycles, as they said. Yeah, they actually, the wording is funny because
But
yeah,
just speaking about our dear friend Suji
yeah.
Masanobu, he had one thing to say about this bicycle blitzkrieg, as it got called. He says, even the long-legged Englishmen could not escape our bicycles. This is the reason they were continually driven off the roads into the jungle, where with their retreat cut off, they were forced to surrender.
Yep. And
And
he,
just, do you mind if I just take over Sherry for like literally 20 seconds?
oh, yeah, here, I have to press the button. Go.
So I just found these images, and this is literally like the bicycle blitzkrieg in action.
There exists footage in color, by the way, a lot of it too.
Ah, okay. But you can see here, right? Like literally with the supplies on their cycles loaded. It's really an underrated aspect of what they were doing. And it, it was common for the Japanese reconnaissance troops on their bicycles to actually be intermingled with the rear guards of the British Indian Army as it was retreating.
Yeah, yeah,
That is
because they
the
overtook
that
them
is
right away. Yeah.
Yeah. And one funny thing is this guys rode the bicycle so hard that the rubber around the wheels were pretty much worn out. And
Yep.
they would continue to ride, ride with
On
it.
the metal
So
spring frame, yeah.
yeah, it would create a noise that actually some allied units, the British and Indian units were
They thought it
thinking
was
it's
tanks,
tanks
yeah.
approaching.
Yeah. Because
It's,
it's like 100 bicycles, yeah.
it's actually like kind of reminds me of like the siren being fitted on the Stuka
On
to
the
create
Stuka,
that,
yeah.
yeah, that demoralizing effect.
Yeah, psychological warfare. It
Yeah,
was it's very
it's perfect.
impressive. And like you said, they could carry three times the amount of supplies. They could go, I don't know how much more distance on a bicycle. Like anyone can imagine, it's much easier to pedal a bicycle than it is to run for your life. And every single time they would overtake the Allied positions, because the Allies are running on these main roads, and you know where the Allies are going to be because there's only a few roads. The Allies have only two options: fight and basically be captured, or run into this dense brush where you don't know where you're going and you're just going to get stuck there while the enemy goes further and further ahead. So it's very impressive, and it does earn the name the Bicycle Blitzkrieg, as it was called. And of course, Yamashita being a very studious student of Blitzkrieg tactics, he didn't just use the bicycles, he employed everything available to him. He used bomber aircraft as mobile artillery because obviously artillery in Malaya would not be very easy. It's you only have a few roads. You can't really bring heavy artillery into most places. It's quite difficult. And so to replace traditional artillery, you'd be using aircraft. And engagements would typically begin with bombing raids on Allied roadblocks and other defensive positions, followed by tanks. And then the bicycle infantry would come in to overwhelm the defenders. As the defenders retreated to more defensible positions, the infantry on the bicycles would just continue to keep going, so they would never let up. Obviously, it's very hard to establish a new defensive line when you're just continuously running for your life. It's very impressive. And I have a quote here from one Colonel Alfred Harrison of the 11th Indian Division, who said of this fight, "Fatigue had stretched the men's mind to the limit and the moral ascendancy. which the Japanese achieved in these few weeks, including a psychic side. The troops were beginning to attribute almost supernatural powers to the Japanese. This is something I've actually talked about in multiple podcasts with friends of mine. At the very beginning of the war, there was these racist attitudes towards the Japanese by Westerners, like the Americans, Canadians, British, and such. And it was that the Japanese were far-sighted, couldn't fly well, couldn't make good things. Like their technology was all just rip-offs, all sorts of
I
racial
think,
bullshit.
yeah, I think it is like I think the Western world was really taken aback with the scale and successful execution of how we see Japan expanding its reach in the South Pacific areas just after Pearl Harbor,
Yeah.
which completely, really destroyed the view that people had because you can't deny the results, right?
But what's funny is, as much as it blew apart the racist ideas that the Japanese, for one, couldn't fight at night was a big thing because they all believe they were told that the Japanese had eyesight problems. It's a hilarious racist little story. I won't go down the rabbit hole. But the Japanese exclusively trained for night fighting. And another thing is they were so taken aback by how well the Japanese were doing. This is particularly in Burma and Malaya. They became to believe that the Japanese were like superhuman jungle fighters, and it's ironic given everything. But yeah, so Yamashita was greatly impressed by the German Blitzkrieg during his time as a military attaché in Berlin, and this is as we've said and alluded to, this is what really allowed him to be able to coordinate air and ground forces in Malaya with remarkableness. And he specifically had signal officers stationed, for air to ground operations, and they had their own operational headquarters. That sounds like any military today. Back then, that's actually kind of innovative that not everybody was doing that kind of stuff. And he had, practice all of this, and they even tried to like practice amphibious
Sorry, I just
landing.
wanted to say,
Mhm.
considering the fact like organization of like the chiefs of staff was not really even a thing till
Yeah.
like the 1870s as well, you can really understand why.
Yeah, exactly. And he had all of his men prior to the invasion practice amphibious landings, although not well, I would add. It's the only thing that they never perfected. Bridge deconstruction and construction and repair. It's very important in Malaya. There's a lot of significant rivers that are going to hold you back. And of course, jungle operations. Here, I had written my notes here. It was Hainan Island in China. They had practices. This is where Tsuji brought them to practice tropical warfare. Even though the island isn't tropical, you would call it a subtropical as a climate. And notably, the bicycles enabled the troops to cover even greater distances and more quickly, as you can imagine, and less fatigue. It's brilliant. The fact that the British didn't incorporate this in Malaya is actually kind of funny, given their strategy actually was to fight in the north and then make your way down south. But I guess they thought it would go a lot slower in practice. The British forces frequently found themselves pushed off the roads by the faster moving bicycle infantry, leading to encirclement in pockets. This relentless pursuit had a profound psychological impact, and I've alluded to this. The British commanders mistakenly believed that there were a lot more Japanese than there actually were, just because they were moving so fast. If anybody's listened to, and I know I bring it up a lot, Dan Carlin's podcast, but I'm a big fan. He talked about this when it came to the Mongol Empire. The Mongols basically were just moving so fast because all of them are mounted that the enemy that they were invading would think, "Oh my God, this settlement's been attacked. This settlement's been attacked. There must be multiple Mongol armies out there." It's not true. It was the same Mongol army just moving so fast. But that has a profound
They,
impact on you.
not to mention, like each warrior literally had, I think, like 5 or 6 horses, anyways.
Yeah, of course. That was brilliant. So they had their supply horses. They had their rotation. So the horse, when it gets tired, you're still moving
Exactly.
with the other horse. Yeah, yeah, of course. The Mongol Empire is fascinating, and I hope
And
to
not to
tackle that
mention,
later.
yeah, I think we just gave ourselves a new idea for the future.
Yeah, I've uh, I've done a far bit of reading in the Mongol Empire. Could do some episodes, and so yeah, the bicycle. It's important to note though, the bicycles alone were not responsible for all of the success. The Japanese had a significant advantage when it came to tanks. The British had not deployed any tanks to Malaya before the war even began, which ultimately would contribute to their downfall. And with the infantry on the bicycles and the tanks, the Japanese were engaging the British before they could even establish any defensive positions.
I would just say like several regiment of armor, just even using Matilda tanks would have stopped the Japanese at once.
Oh, can you
especially like,
imagine? Yeah.
just now
Like
because
we
the
talked
metal.
about the North African campaign with the Italians going at the British. It would be very similar.
Yeah, and I think at that time in the world, except for the Panzer Mark IV, I don't think there was really a tank that was. No, I think now you had like, the T-34s and all coming into service, but at least at the Far East, there would be no tank that could really stand up to the metal now.
No, and certainly not the Japanese tanks. I mean, we made fun of the Italian tanks, and I'll still make fun of the Italian tanks. But
Cappuccino machines.
yeah, the Japanese tanks were specifically not armored very heavily because they didn't want to waste the resources, and the Chinese were not throwing anything that warranted the need for more armor. I mean, if the British had a significant amount of tanks, it would have been interesting to see what happens, but wasn't meant to be. So Percival was compelled to authorize a quick withdrawal from Jitra, directing his men to retreat south to Gurun. But the defenses at Gurun were not yet prepared, and the Japanese were moving far too fast. I'm actually going to, yeah, I have a map of this engagement here. This is at Gurun. Sorry, same types of maps with the copyright Alamy over it. I couldn't find a non one. My bad, but yeah, it's the most detailed maps I could find. So yeah, Gurren wasn't prepared. Percival would actually later reflect on this moment in his post-war memoirs, which were titled War in Malaya, and here's a direct quote. This withdrawal would have been difficult under the most favorable conditions. With the troops tired, units mixed as a result of the fighting, communications broken, and the night dark, it was inevitable that the orders should be delayed, and that in some cases, they should never reach the addresses. This is what in fact occurred. The withdrawal, necessary as it might have been, was too fast and too complicated for disorganized and exhausted troops, whose disorganization and exhaustion is only increased. So, yeah, things didn't go well. From the offset, the British forces were too
It
thinly. Oh, yeah,
it really feels like this disorientation and demoralization and lack of communication by the Allied command.
yeah.
It feels like France 1940 all over again.
Yeah, it's a good comparison. Yeah. It is quite similar because when the Ardennes offensive when they figured out what was going on, they didn't know what to do because the impossible had happened and they had put their entire defensive line in the north like that. Like it screwed everything up for the French. And it's in retrospect, it's so dumb. How did they not have any reconnaissance in that area? Like you could have just had
Actually, they
aircraft.
did.
They did.
Actually, they did. It is reported three times to Gamelan.
Really? And he just didn't. Okay.
He just said like, no, that's impossible. And
Okay, you're right. I
there
read
was
something. Yeah,
there were like like dozens of kilometers long traffic jams of German vehicles in the Ardennes, and you just send like a bomber force. That's it. Bye
but
bye.
he would have assumed it wasn't a significant force. He would have assumed it was just like a unit trying. I would have, yeah.
He dismissed it from what I read.
Well,
It's impossible.
alternate history right there. Like that would have been a massacre if they hit them. Oh my God, they would have hit them hard too, because as soon as they realized what was there, it's like, oh, well, we'll just get this little pocket. Now they're all trapped, and we're going to spend 2 solid days taking out this entire column. Just like, and then Germany surrenders. Like that's it. But anyways, I
Well,
desist.
the cream of the force would be gone. Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, France would have invaded Germany. Like I don't want to go down the rabbit hole, but the fact that France wasn't the aggressor in World War II, invading Germany much more thoroughly, it's like it's insane when you look at the numbers on paper. It's crazy. The Germans really they outpunched their weight. We'll say that much. But from the offset, British forces were too thinly spread across a 14-mile front, facing very challenging landscapes. There's dense jungle on the right flank, monsoon-soaked rice fields and rubber plantations in the center, and mangrove swamps to their left. Yamashita's concentrated attacks breached the Allied lines, and in the ongoing retreats resulted not only in the loss of personnel, but also all of their essential military equipment. Because let's remember, men aren't exactly going to be able to carry everything they brought to these defensive lines easily, especially when you're running for your life. So each time a position was overrun, the
The,
troops had no
the last
opportunity.
part was really important, running for your life.
Yeah,
An
I
army
mean,
in a that's why I guess, when armies retreat in good order or you have an organized retreat, it can be a victory in its own right,
it's
the long
the
term.
It's the identical situation to when MacArthur had blundered up the defense of the Philippines. When he put everybody at the coastal areas, they were supposed to have ample time to move their supplies to Bataan, and he never allowed them to do that because he implemented War Orange Plan 3 way too late, and they were running for their lives. It's the exact same situation. So, yeah, each time a position is overrun, troops have no opportunity to evacuate critical supplies, and the bicycle infantry just hinder their escape further. The defeat at Jitra highlighted this mistake, that of deploying these under-resourced troops to defend all of Malaya. What a better idea would have been, in retrospect, of course, they could have all gone to a southern line around Johor, and this would have shortened their supply lines, extended the Japanese ones, and then more could have been exploited. Now,
And
for
not to mention, if you move back further, it also would have let your men time to rest and
yeah,
also build up more solid defenses. You would have like an extra few days.
yeah. But as we all know, even today, military doctrine is you want to have more space of mobility, space to move. So you always want to keep a greater distance for your enemy there. Also, the plan for the defense of Malaya rested heavily on the idea that they could hold their airfields as long as possible to use them against the enemy. Unfortunately, that's actually really what they screwed up. A lot of the air personnel sabotaged the airfields prematurely and way too fast, thinking that it was over. And they didn't tell the ground troops. So the ground troops were stuck defending these positions in the north for airfields that were already being like destroyed. It was such a cluster. It's a cluster. I was about to use the F word, but we're on YouTube, so let's try and limit that. I'm trying to watch my language. It was chaotic, to say the least. Consequently, the Allies began to withdraw to the Gurun area, which offered natural defenses. There was barriers that they hoped to use to delay the Japanese advance. Now, the retreat from Jitra was so chaotic, it was a complete disaster. It resulted in many more casualties for Murray, Leon, than the actual fighting at Jitra. So you have to imagine that it's kind of like what you hear in medieval warfare, It's not when they're fighting you see the casualties. It's actually when one of the armies is retreating that the casualties start to really occur.
It's yeah, when they lose their cohesion and discipline, right?
Yeah,
And it's a free for all.
exactly. So a lot of casualties as they're running for their lives. And this is, primarily many units on the front lines that never received the withdrawal orders because it didn't come in time or it simply never came. While others are, lost attempting to cross natural barriers like the Bata River just south of Jitra. Eventually, Murray was compelled to withdraw further south to the Muda River, and that's about 30 miles away, to establish defensive positions along the Crian River. Meanwhile, Percival is in a state of absolute panic. The entire defensive strategy relied on holding the Japanese as far north of Singapore as possible to minimize the air threat to the city. However, with the rapid pace of the Japanese attacks, it seemed that there was simply too many adversaries attacking them. Reluctantly, Percival ordered a general withdrawal south of the Perak River, hoping to delay the Japanese in northern Malaya for as long as possible. His commanders on the ground soon began pleading for reinforcements, as they were heavily outgunned. Although Percival had an Australian division stationed in Johor, he couldn't send them north for fear that the Japanese would launch a naval invasion further south, which could threaten Singapore without the division's support. To be more specific, this would be like an amphibious hook. So they would hook behind the position and then, start attacking Singapore or even come up north and
No,
attack it
I
from the
just
rear.
I just really have to ask this question then. Would it even be possible, like, for them to even consider this? Because by now he would have at least gotten information that, the Japanese are launching invasions and units elsewhere, right? So you have naval units committed in multiple theaters of operation right now.
Yeah.
Where's the shipping? You will not launch any amphibious assault without, like, an escort force and protective force.
Well, the British still had a few old gunboats that they were playing around with, so you're right that they could, and they have PT. Well, they wouldn't call them PT boats, but they have patrol boats that could harass transports. But I would assume the Japanese, even though they don't have large naval forces present, they would have something to escort, like maybe a destroyer or
I
something.
suppose maybe yeah, I guess that would like be more than enough to deal with BT boats.
Because remember, this is the very early part of the war. The Imperial Japanese Navy wasn't at the point they were actively trying to kill the soldiers. So, you know, they weren't at each other's throat yet that much. It wasn't that bad. That's like
Yet.
Guadalcanal. That during Guadalcanal, that's when the Navy's like, you know what? Let's bring these guys to that island and let's not even care if all the supplies get off the boat. Just kick them off. Like that's the way they roll.
And we are not going to evacuate them. It's fine.
Yeah. Oh boy, that's another episode. I'd love to do the myths and realities of how much they fought because people think like people go a little overboard on it, but there are some funny things like the conversation as to the people who thought they would invade Australia and how those conversations actually went in the conferences. That's funny. There was fistfights amongst the Japanese Navy and Army. It's pretty funny. Anyways, furthermore, since the invasion began, the island of Penang had been subjected to daily bombings by the Japanese. I don't think I have a map for where that island's located. One sec. I got this map. I got here. It shows the Prince of Wales sinking. Doesn't show Penang anywhere, does it? Oh well. Anyways, there's an island that's just it's oh, here it is. It's at the northwest portion, just beside Butterworth. I don't know why that's I guess it was a commander. But yeah, there's that small island over there that had been receiving a lot of bombing. Oh, sorry, it's on this map. It's right under Gurun. Yeah. So so Penang had
Uh,
been oh yeah,
Quite close to an RAF airfield, one of the
yeah,
assets that was supposed to be protected.
exactly. So Penang had been subjected to daily bombings since this had all begun. As Yamashita's 25th Army advanced westwards towards the stronghold that was at Penang, British High Command determined that the island should be abandoned due to its lack of tactical or strategic value in light of the rapid Japanese advance. Sorry, I'm about to sneeze. Try not to sneeze. Thus, on December the 17th, European residents were evacuated from the island, while the local Malay inhabitants were unfortunately left behind to face the Japanese forces. No, sorry. It's waiting for that to come. So, as you can imagine, as a Malaysian, you get to watch all the white people get onto ferries and flee to the mainland. It probably did not feel too good, and it was definitely racist as hell. One person who was there was Mrs. Murray Riley, and she recalled this. It still hurts to think about how the white race let down hundreds of similarly faithful servants who trusted in us and looked to us for protection from the hated Japanese. So, a little touch of
Well,
racial stuff there. Yeah.
well, I mean, it's just I think with the locals, it's just choosing one devil for the other if you really look at it in the grand scheme of
Oh,
things.
oh yeah. And I think in retrospect, they would have preferred the White Devil over what's going to come because Malaysia, people don't talk about this. And people all know about Unit 731 because it's the most famous of hundreds of units that existed that all performed terrible experiments. There was many in Malaya and Singapore, and they did horrible things to the population. Like, I mean, it was bad. And there was multiple
I,
massacres of
I,
civilians.
I say, like if India had to be like continue to be ruled, better to be under the British rule than Japanese rules.
Oof. And
Not even.
I don't know what it was about the Japanese military of World War II, but of all the peoples they came into contact with, they were the most racist against India. I've never read any rationale as to why, but you read about when they would take prisoners, they would do the worst to the Indians, like the absolute worst. Yeah. Yeah. In general, if the Japanese occupied your country, it wasn't good during World War II. Really not good. Yeah.
Yep, I think we've established that.
Uh, so you get a real sense of the time period there. When the Europeans were being evacuated, the British struggled to transport arms and supplies, resulting in large stockpiles in Penang falling into Yamashita's hands, which he would need. The local Malays, understandably, turned against their former colonial
Just
rulers.
one thing,
Yeah,
can we just call the supplies as Percival rations?
Percival rations, that's a good way to put it. Yeah, Percival rations. Uh, some historians now contend that the moral collapse of the British rule in Southeast Asia occurred not in Singapore, but at Penang. For the next 3 years and 8 months of Japanese occupation, Penang would experience significant turmoil. There was food shortages, hyperinflation caused by the Japanese overproduction of the banana dollar, as it was known, and widespread repression. Many women from Penang were taken as comfort women, and thousands from the Chinese community were executed during something we might talk about later called the Sukching Massacre. which was targeting what the Japanese perceived to be elements of Chinese Malays who might sabotage or resist their rule and become guerrilla fighters, for example. This is classic Japanese divide and rule policies, which would see them favoring ethnic Malays to, kind of fuel some interrace racism towards the Chinese population and da 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 da. Just like a pecking order was put into play. The Battle of Chicha highlighted the folly of attempting to defend all of Malaya with a undermanned army. As I had said, a more strategic line could have been made at Johor, which would have just helped the British in most ways. Now, as December drew close, the Japanese began occupying most of northern Malaya and continuing their advance southwards. The defenders made continuous attempts to establish defensive lines, but they were unable to maintain them. Armed with tanks and stolen bicycles, the Japanese employed Blitzkrieg tactics that the British and Indian defenders were simply not prepared for. On Christmas Eve, Murray Leon was dismissed as the commander of the 11th Indian Division, and he would become a casualty of circumstances, we would say, having been the man who tried to prepare Operation Matador, but it was never allowed, and it probably would have helped him greatly. He would return to India and soon retire from military service, and I actually think that kind of worked out more for him. At least he didn't become a POW. But
That would have
yeah,
been way worse.
and
But ultimately, it's one more thing that kind of worked against both Murray Leon and Percival. When war broke out and they knew the Japanese threat is also uh, coming, the British Indian Army was expanded rapidly.
yes, yeah,
Now, the problem was the small core of professional officers, they now had to be completely dispersed throughout the entire army to spread their experience across.
mhm,
And that obviously left every unit throughout the army that is going to have a shortage of well-trained officers.
of course,
I don't think that really helped. It's just really downplayed. I mean, like it downgrades the ability of the army to function.
yeah. He was going to be succeeded by Brigadier Archibald Paris. I don't know if do you have any information on Paris?
I do just, unfortunately, I cannot find a photo of him.
Oh,
It's
well.
just only his father, unfortunately. So I'll just speak. So Brigadier Archibald Charles Melville Paris, you know, was the son of General Sir Archibald Paris, a Royal Marine officer who actually commanded the Royal Naval Division in the First World War.
Psst. Hey you ever hear me talk about some great Pacific War movie or documentary like Pearl Harbor Minute by Minute over on Netflix and feel the urge to watch it for yourself?
Uh-oh, you live in Japan and your Netflix doesn't have it? Must suck to be you.
Sucks to be me right now.
Oh wow, season 4 of Demon Slayer is out. Oh wait, I can't watch it on Canadian Netflix, but it's over on Japan Netflix? Whatever will I do?
Oh no, no.
Being blocked from regional content? With private internet access, you too can watch Demon Slayer Season 4 by switching your IP address to Japan.
Yes! Hell yeah!
Why stop with Japan? With private internet access, you can change your IP address to over 84 different countries and every single US state, giving you access to region-restricted content all over the world.
Nice.
Many websites and services like Netflix are only accessible depending on your physical location, but private internet access helps you overcome these restrictions. Think about it, without private internet access, it's like paying for a TV series and missing out on the latest season. Shots fired, Demon Slayer on Canadian Netflix.
Is that like a personal attack or something?
Ever fear people are gonna find your Google searches?
Banzai! Banzai! Banzai!
FBI, open up!
Private internet access makes sure that those Google searches remain a buried secret, as private internet access encrypts your internet access and has a no logs policy. Think you're safe with the local coffee shop's free Wi-Fi? No, you are certainly not. Private internet access gives you more privacy features than any other software, and real-time protection from malware and trackers, giving you peace of mind knowing those Google searches remain seen by you and you alone. Private internet access has a no-log policy that they've defended in court, which means they are not storing any of your browsing data. Hey, are you like me using different devices under one household? Private internet access is available on all platforms and protects an unlimited amount of devices at the same time. I personally use private internet access to unblock movies and TV series from all across the globe, and I sleep easier writing scripts for my YouTube channel and others knowing my data is secure. Look, this is a no-brainer. Sign up with my link in the description of this video to get 83% off, plus 4 months for free, so it ends up being only around $2 per month. Signing up for private internet access is risk-free. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee, and 24/7 customer support is available. So don't forget to click www.piavpn.com/the Pacific War Channel, and a big thanks to Private Internet Access for sponsoring this video.
And he's also from his mother's side, the daughter of General Henry Melville, who was Order of Bath, and descended from the Melville family. He was a military man, served from 1909 onwards. He was a lieutenant and captain in World War I, winning the Military Cross in June 1917. Then again, the typical thing that he continued to serve in the army, since he's descended from both sides, like with military service. Like the person that is considered the founding member of the Melville family, right, from his mother, even he also served in the armed forces, so that the military tradition is there. So in December 1941, he would be given command of the 12th Indian Infantry Brigade. I'm not sure if it was actually attached to the 11th Indian Division, but it was a unit that was stationed in Malaysia at this time. Just not 100% sure which was the division it was attached to. And what would happen is, as we have already alluded to, the 11th is retreating in complete disarray. And the 12th, under Paris's very exceptional and capable leadership, they are going to launch stiff rearguard actions that actually catches the Japanese completely off guard. Like, these guys are gonna give like a bloody nose to the Japanese advancing units as they cover the retreat of the division. And it's more thanks to, Brigadier Paris. And when Murray-Leon just got sacked for a while, Brigadier Paris is given the temporary command of the 11th Division before he would have to hand it over to Major General Billy. And then he would return to command the 12th, and he would be in command of this unit for the end of the campaign.
All right. Here, let me just bring up my map again. So yeah, Brigadier Archibald Paris is now here, but as you already alluded to, it's quite a chaotic scene. And I think it's pretty unexpected for him to be just tossed into the fire like this. By December the 26th, the Japanese 5th Division and the 4th Guards Regiment had crossed the Perak River and began preparing for a general offensive against Campar. And I'm going to bring up my last map. Yeah, here we are. The area of Campar. Now, Campar was crucial for the defense of central Malaya, as it was not easily outflanked inland. Located halfway between Penang and Kuala Lumpur, its terrain was unsuitable for the Japanese tanks, making it an ideal defensive position. Paris prepared to make a stand with infantry battalions, some of which were composed of survivors from Chitra and Gurun. Among them were a British battalion from the Leicesters and the East Surreys, as well as a Jet Punjab battalion that included some Sikhs. The 12th Brigade was tasked with hastily digging in trenches, wiring them up, and clearing fields around the ridges of Campar to improve visibility for the enemy. Now, after 3 weeks of perpetual fighting and retreat, the morale of the defenders had, as you can imagine, collapsed, as Colonel Alfred Harrison of the 11th Indian Division observed on Christmas Day this quote. Oh, sorry, I already given that quote. Sorry, I'm looking at my notes. This is the quote I had given before about the Japanese having supernatural powers.
I think that was when we were discussing the bicycle Blitzkrieg.
Yeah. But yeah, I guess this is exactly where he'd given the quote. Sorry. In contrast, the well-trained and battle-hardened Japanese forces had become so accustomed to the endless amount of victories that they approached the battle with the firm belief that, the guys were just going to run before them. Yamashita applied lessons learned from the Germans about using aircraft as mobile artillery, which proved highly effective in the challenging jungle terrain, where positioning utilizing ground artillery was difficult if not impossible. Most of the engagements began with bombing raids on Allied roadblocks, quickly followed up by frontal assaults until a front line was established. The Japanese then sought opportunities to flank the defenders through the jungles and encircle them. Essentially, Yamashita executed sophisticated blitzkrieg tactics adapted to jungle warfare, and he achieved devastating results with this. Now, when the attack commenced, it came from the west coastal roads. Japanese tanks struck the 12th Brigade along a 3-mile stretch of rural road south of a tin mining town named Gopeng. As the tanks advanced, small arms and heavy machine gun fire erupted from both sides of the road. Following the tanks were trucks filled with Japanese infantry who disembarked and spread out into the brush. The machine gun fire originated from the jungles, with occasional shells being fired from some tanks' 37mm cannons, splintering rubber trees. Initially, the defenders were paralyzed by the sight of Japanese tanks, but this fear soon faded, and they began to unleash a barrage of fire upon the Japanese infantry. Some tanks advanced alone onto a bridge near a small hamlet named Depang, where they encountered defenders armed with Lanchester submachine guns and Bren gun carriers equipped with anti-tank rifles, which is going to make Swiss cheese of Japanese tanks, mind you. Lieutenant Colonel Ian Stewart noted, the anti-tank rifle made no impression against the Japanese mediums, while their 37mm guns went right through our armor like paper. So obviously it's uneven battle there. I'm not sure, did you find anything on Colonel Ian Stewart?
No, actually, I did not.
No worries. I mean, he is a low-ranking individual in this, but a lot of the testimony actually comes from him. He had a lot to write about the events. Despite the British lacking any effective response to the tanks, the Japanese assumed that anything that approached them would have the means to counterattack. So they approached with caution. Those inside the tanks closed their hatches, which created a sensation of being in a Turkish bathhouse. As you can imagine, this is the jungle. It's very hot. Subtropical conditions, and you're in a cramped tank. There's no air conditioners in these tanks. It's not modern at all, you know? So the defenders, armed with the Lanchesters, shot desperately at the little slits in the tanks, you know, where you would stick your guns out, and their bullets, you know, usually would just ricochet off. Eventually, a 2-pounder anti-tank gun succeeded in destroying a single tank, prompting the Japanese armor to retreat slightly to allow their infantry to catch up. Now, on the other side of the bridge, 200 defenders received orders to destroy it. Fortunately for them, the water at Campar was quite shallow, and most managed to wade across about a mile downstream from the bridge. So you got to imagine these allies are like trying to protect this like bridgehead, and like they blow up the bridge on them. So all the guys on the other side basically were like left to die if the water had been higher. Now, Stewart's 12th Brigade had bought enough time for the defenses at Campar to be strengthened. The observation posts at Campar Hill provided excellent artillery spotting. And in terms of artillery, the British were actually better off than the Japanese, even though they didn't have much naval or aerial support. Throughout much of the war in Malaya, the Japanese kept the defenders on the edge, staying very close to them to complicate any artillery strikes. The defenders often attempted to withdraw to create space for artillery bombardments, only to have the Japanese quickly pounce on them. However, Campar offered sweeping fields of fire, providing much more room for maneuverability. The defenders' line at Campar resembled a goose egg on the map, with a all-around defensive perimeter surrounded around Campar Hill. Their artillery was concealed amongst the greenery, with 200 rounds of neatly stacked ammunition beside each gun. The 15th and 6th Brigades occupied the low ground, where the road and railway ran alongside the hill and throughout the town. And I don't believe you found any information on Major General Saburo Kawamata.
Just a very little bit beyond the
Okay.
fact that he was executed for war crimes after the war. But
Yeah.
he wasn't really, I would say, a guy at the senior post that had combat experience. This was one of the only times he would be doing it, because from his history, 1937 to 38, he was a senior staff officer in the Ministry of War.
Mhm.
Then, continues to do that with the China Army. So between March 1941 to pretty much end of 1942. Sorry, May 1942. He commands the 213th Infantry Regiment, and then, as we see in this campaign, he is commanding the 9th Infantry Brigade.
Okay.
And after this, his command roles really ends because for the rest of the war, he is mostly serving in Indochina and the garrison command as the chief of staff, and even for the home defense of Honshu, he's the chief of staff of the 59th Army.
Fair enough.
So this was literally his real combat that you would see as a general.
All right. So it is going to be him who's leading the attack upon Campar with his 9th Brigade. Now, on December the 31st, he initiated a probe against the 28th Gurkha Brigade, which had entrenched themselves in some scrub on the hill. Once the Japanese pinpointed the Gurkhas' location, they began shelling them with howitzers. However, this revealed their positions, allowing the defenders to retaliate with artillery fire, which proved very effective in repelling the Japanese advances. At about midnight on New Year's Eve, Lieutenant Colonel Augustus Murdoch, commanding the 155th Field Regiment, ordered a 12-gun salute fired at the Japanese, kind of as a cheeky gesture. About 7 hours later, Kawamura launched his main assault on the western side of Campar Hill, targeting the Trunk Road, as it was known. The brunt of this attack fell on the newly formed British battalion, the Leicesters and the Isures, who struggled to escape the battles of Jitra and Gurun. Exhausted from navigating through mosquito-infested nights in the jungles and swamps and paddy fields, many were suffering from malaria, which is kind of the untold or unknown enemy in this area of the world. Man, malaria hit everybody. It took out so many guys. Mosquitoes, I don't know. I can't remember the direct quote, but mosquitoes have killed more people than anything else, I think, on Earth.
I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't
Yeah.
be surprised if it is.
Just like in Burma, I mean, yeah, malaria was hitting people hard on both sides. They numbered about 600 under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Esmond Morrison, a 48-year-old with a World War I military cross amongst his many medals. When the war began, he proved to be a pretty serious soldier, despite some referring to him as a polo-playing playboy. It's probably an interesting story there. Morrison often shared the dangers at the front lines and frequently picked up a rifle and a
I think
bayonet to clear roadblocks.
I would just say that reputation is, since British officers actually, when their shift or duty for the day is over, they're not really even expected to talk about military matters or how to improve the army facilities or training regimen. They're supposed to talk about anything else. This is really a pre-World War II, interwar period British Army office
Yeah.
in that regards.
The Japanese infantry came out of the mist, carrying 4-inch mortars behind them. The Japanese began to mortar fire. One of the early casualties was a company commander who had been evacuated as a mortar splinter shattered his jaw. Despite the heavy mortar fire, the observation officers of the 88th Field were able to pinpoint Japanese advances, and they got their artillery to fire 25-pounder shells upon them. Colonel Tsuji Masanobu would write in his memoirs, "A continuous stream of casualties coming back down the hill to safety, either carried on stretchers or supported on the shoulders of comrades, who they themselves were wounded." So yeah, Tsuji, he's an eyewitness to most of this. He had a lot to write about in the Malayan campaign, except for the many massacres that he ordered under Yamashita, where Yamashita had no idea, and he was basically doing this on his own to besmirch the guy's career. But anyways.
Well, obviously he's not going to write about this.
Yeah, exactly. The Japanese attempted to locate the Allied artillery, but it was being discreetly towed by vehicles to hide their positions within the secondary jungle of the hill. During the battle, one of Morrison's lieutenants was walking alone in a trench just before the main action began when he heard movement and encountered Japanese soldiers. He fired his revolver at them and then quickly retreated to a nearby platoon. The Japanese were known for their strength and stealth, especially at night, sneaking behind enemy lines. A driver from a gunnery regiment, while delivering rations on a hill, noticed that a nearby Bren gun position had just become overrun by Japanese troops. Instead of quietly escaping to seek help, the driver, whose name was Walker, exited his vehicle armed with a Thompson submachine gun, stealthily approached the Japanese and launched a surprise attack, forcing them to retreat. and he would receive a medal for his bravery. Now, a troop sergeant, major named Hugil, stationed at a outlying observation post connected by a field telephone to the main post, received a Distinguished Conduct Medal for his calmness in continuing to call in artillery fire, creating a protective wall around him after being cut off by the enemy. Once the attack subsided, he made his way back to the main observation post, but stumbled across some isolated Japanese soldiers who had just captured a Vickers machine gun. Yugil quickly gathered 5 other infantrymen and he led a bayonet charge to reclaim the position, which is kind of ironic. It's giving the Japanese a taste of their own medicine, I guess. Emergency.
Manzai.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can scream banzai at them.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I couldn't resist.
Emergency Commissioned Officer Lieutenant Edgar Newland, who was commanding a platoon of about 30 men from the Leicesters. Sorry, I keep saying that differently. What's the pronunciation of that British term of that area in the world of Britain?
Leicester.
Leicesters. Okay. God damn, I keep saying like. My bad. Sorry, Britain.
I only know this just because Leicester City is in the football in the Premier League.
There you
That's
go.
how I know it.
Leicester's in one of the most forward positions of the defensive lines during intense attacks and counterattacks. His platoon was cut off, and he was surrounded for much of the battle, yet Newland and his men successfully repelled numerous assaults and held their isolated position for 2 consecutive days. General Percival specifically praised Newland and his men for their crucial role in defending Campar. Newland was awarded a military cross, while his regular platoon sergeant, Ewan MacDonald, would receive a Distinguished Conduct Medal. It's moments like these, where forces engaged in fierce combat, reveal the extraordinary nature of, heroism and bravery. Often the individual actions in battles are overlooked, and, these are the kinds of stories we should share, because it highlights what it was really like to fight in these situations, certainly bloody ones. Now, after 2 days, the Japanese managed to capture part of the eastern sector of the location known as Thompson's Ridge. I'm trying to look on the map. It's very small, but you can see it here. I can actually zoom in for a second. Right here is Thompson's Ridge.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going back. British battalions, including a Punjab battalion, made unsuccessful attempts to recapture it. Morrison believed the British defenders needed rest before launching another counterattack, so he sent 2 platoons of Sikhs and Gujars to bayonet charge Thompson's Hill under some mortar fire. Now, tragically, 34 soldiers would die, including their 21-year-old commander, Charles Lamb, who was killed in the initial charge. The second commander, Captain John Graham, lost both of his legs to a grenade, but he continued to encourage his men, and he was seen throwing a grenade at the Japanese trenches before he bled out.
Yeah.
That's a hell of a scene.
That's like going down fighting. That's like the truest definition.
Yeah, that's Hollywood movie moment stuff right there. Ultimately, courage, artillery, and favorable terrain would be insufficient to actually hold Campar. Yamashita decided to outflank Percival by maneuvering around Campar with a series of seaborne landings, and I think I can pull up my map. Not sure if it shows the sea. It doesn't exactly show, but you can imagine here in this. I don't know if you can even see my mouse cursor, but he would make what we call a naval hook, basically. So he would go around.
I guess it's
them.
around that where that we see that kind of U-turn around Tello Cancer.
Yeah, I believe that would be that one. So it was actually a series of seaborne landings along the western coast where 40 small craft, some of them being used in Singora and Patani Islands and others by rail at Alor-Setar. Tsuji opposed Yamashita's plan to do this, by the way, arguing that using the crafts would put them at risk as they were needed for the upcoming assault on Singapore. Because the Japanese had a very limited amount of small vessels, I guess you could say. They're not transports by any means, that they would need to cross over to hit Singapore Island. Despite the objections, Yamashita ordered the landings near the port of Teluk Ansan, located about 30 miles southeast of Campar. The forces managed to get behind Percival's 11th Division, 11th Indian Division, which were fiercely defending Campar, as you can imagine, and they were going to be cut off in this process. Yamashita also, he devised a 3-pronged attack. One prong would involve a fresh Imperial Guards division arriving from Thailand, who would paddle down the Perak River directly into the town itself. Another prong would approach from the west on landing crafts to enter the river from the opposite direction, and the third prong would move up the Burnham River, land about 50 miles from Perak, and then march north towards Teluk Ansan. Lieutenant General Takuro Matsue of the Japanese 5th Division was going to be commanding these landings.
Was the Guards division still symbolic, like how we had the armies of Europe with their Guards divisions being their elite and best? Was it still true for, would we say that would be applicable for the Japanese
Yeah,
Guards?
so the men, like most of these symbolic divisions, the men were chosen for their height, so they and their physicality. They would have to be quite strong, but particularly the Japanese really wanted to be the tallest guys, because it was a psychological kind of factor to like scare the enemy. But in this particular case, they weren't elites. They weren't trained any better than anybody else. I don't want to say they're paper tigers, but they don't match other groups like the Germans would put out. This is not a real elite force. So despite being called like the Imperial Guards, this particular one isn't
Yeah,
anything
I guess
special.
one of like just because Guards units, it kind of takes me back to the Napoleonic era
Yeah,
because
exactly.
we know like the Imperial Guard of Napoleon, that was his ultimate fighting force.
Yeah, that's like you don't
And
waste them on anything unless you need to. Yeah.
you know the situation screwed up, like
Oh
Russia,
yeah,
1812.
exactly. Now, while the British held the line at Campar, 1,500 Matsue's men crowded onto landing crafts, navigating the coast and trying to identify various gaps in the mangrove hedges. One steamer, towing about 10 landing crafts, went too far south and attempted to enter the Selangor River, which was defended by a Jap battalion supported by artillery. The Japanese were repelled, losing one of 3 landing crafts before moving further north, which is a terrible loss for them. They needed every single landing craft they had. Within Perak, Matsue faced a significant setback when 4 landing rafts ran aground on a sandbar at the river's mouth and required rescue. A British patrol boat actually would spot them and left a report of the situation, leaving the Japanese vulnerable and exposed. Nothing happened, however, as Percival would later remark, here's a quote, "Unfortunately, neither the Navy nor the Air Force were able to take advantage of this unique opportunity." And it would have been quite an opportunity.
Well, wouldn't
Just
they have the army also have had guns? Also, they could have trained a couple of them on.
Yeah, but I guess it was a secondary thing in the grand scheme of things when they're fighting for their life at
True enough.
Campar, but I don't know. Despite the setbacks, the Japanese forces managed to land and advance on Telakansan. And on January the 2nd, they encountered the 3rd Indian Cavalry and the 1st Independent Company. Under Stewart's command, these troops were equipped with armored cars and additional Thompson and Bren guns, allowing them to engage the Japanese in the narrow streets of Telakansan. They inflicted significant casualties, but with only about 250 men, they were unable to hold back the enemy. Stewart ultimately decided to order them to conduct delaying actions instead of attempting to actually defend the town. Consequently, the defenders began to impede the Japanese advance on the main north-south road, but Telakansan would ultimately fall. This left the defenders at Campar at risk of encirclement and destruction. Although Kawamuro's forces at Campar showed no signs of actually breaking through, and after 4 solid days of fighting, they were losing a lot of men, Paris was troubled by the possibility that his main supply road up to Campar had just been cut off. Obviously, that really is kind of an endgame scenario for you. He requested permission from Percival to withdraw to the next defensive line behind the Slim River. For Paris, the priority was to preserve his troops rather than territory, ensuring that when reinforcements arrived to Malaya, he would have enough men to launch a counterattack. He stated at the time, "With no reserves in hand, we were still in a position of being unable to accept major losses." Thus, it fell to the 12th Brigade to keep the enemy at bay while Paris organized a safe withdrawal with the rest of the division, which would have been the first real withdrawal, not just a bunch of guys like fleeing for their lives, like an orderly retreat, as we would say. An unusual side story emerged during the delaying actions with the 12th Brigade. Brigadier Stewart discovered the body of a dead European cyclist. I remember writing this in my notes. I don't, this didn't, by the way, for people who don't know, a lot of what I'm talking about is built off of previous notes for the work I did with Kings and Generals for their Pacific War Week by Week series and the associated podcast. But this never made the YouTube episode. It's an interesting, weird little story. So, Brigadier Stewart, he discovers the body of a dead European on a bicycle. He's dressed, apparently, and there's the quote, in khaki shorts, a gray uniform with a shirt and a forage cap. Now, earlier in the campaign, a Punjabi sentry had shot a man on a frontline river bridge, believing him to be British, until when he looked over and he attempted to grab, the guy tried to grab the sentry's Thompson from him. It turns out he was not British. He was German. So yeah, they found a German guy here in Malaya. Now, to kind of explain
Wow.
something, yeah, just before hostilities had begun, the British legation in Bangkok had warned that deserters from Vichy French-owned Indochina, specifically the 5th Regiment of the French Foreign Legion, were in the area and in contact with the Nazi embassy. And they were likely offering like assistance to their Japanese allies, via sabotage and espionage. So this is kind of like this small story, but basically there's this belief that this is a German guy kind of working on behalf of the Japanese, and it's a unique case where maybe the Germans and Japanese were actually helping each other because notoriously during World War II they really didn't often. So yeah, but
Would it be unsurprising, like you have this kind of civilians or local, like, one, 2 man kind of tasks? Norway, you had the heavy water raid that was like 5, 6 men in the raid
yeah,
that were really
exactly.
involved.
But the only reason why I bring this up is Percival receives a report about this, and he's pretty shocked because the report's like there was a German guy and he tried to disarm a sentry and seize a bridge single-handedly. So from Percival's viewpoint, it's like, oh, are there German like special forces helping the Japanese? Like, what's going on, right? It's kind of like the Pearl Harbor myth where they're like, oh, the Japanese couldn't have done this by themselves. It must be Germans directing them.
I just, but why would you think there'll be sizable German formations? Because
I don't know.
Barber also started months ago.
Yeah, I know it's ridiculous, but anyways, there's a whole funny. I read this in one book where the guy went into depth about who this guy was, and it turns out that this guy, anyways, he was in a civilian capacity. He was a former soldier and stuff, but yeah, guy was brave too. He really did try to
Yeah.
break down a bridge for the Japanese. It's kind of funny, but as the 12th Brigade continued their delaying actions, they discovered another European body accompanying Japanese troops. Local police identified the corpse as that of a German political refugee. He was a former mining engineer who had disappeared weeks earlier. So you kind of have to go figure. So there's like 2 German guys found. So Percival's like curious as to what's going on. Basically, the Japanese were just grabbing this guy because he knew demolitions. He was an expert, so they could use him for like ridge destruction and stuff. And he knew the territory because he did mining excavations. And in my notes, I actually have the book where I read this was titled Singapore Burning, Heroism in Surrender During World War II by Colin Smith.
It's just like political refugee. Like, yeah, the German government wouldn't have sanctioned his
Oh.
work.
Oh, there's multiple places that had German embassies and Italian, and the Japanese, when they would occupy certain places, there was a lot of mischief and a lot of, we'll call it harsh letters between governments, Germany and Japan, about the treatment of their people. Yeah. Especially in the Dutch East Indies. There was a lot of German, they're not colonists. There were, like, I guess you'd call them like visa workers. They were there for the oil rigs and stuff. And anyways, yeah, the Japanese didn't know what to do with them or how to treat them. Exhausted after 3 weeks of near constant combat with little sleep, the 12th Brigade continued to conduct delaying actions. The Japanese Air Force wreaked havoc on vehicles and anyone traveling along the roads during daylight hours. Stewart estimated that approximately half of the casualties in his brigade resulted from aerial attacks, totaling some 90 killed and wounded. Given that there were at least 4,000 troops, this casualty rate was relatively light, and Stewart expressed satisfaction with the outcome, stating this quote, "It had been an eminently successful battle. However, it was less of a battle in the traditional sense and more of a series of brief skirmishes. The brigade managed to delay the enemy and inflict heavy casualties upon them when possible, but they were often doing so while retreating. Ultimately, Campar would fall when Telakansan was finally captured. Percival could have sent some Australian brigades from Johor or a few garrison battalions from Singapore, eager for the action, but he chose instead to concentrate the forces at Campar that were already there and not send any more reinforcements, because he thought that Yamashita might attack him elsewhere. And Yamashita was giving the impression he was open to more, amphibious hooks, so he has reason to believe so. The forces at Campar, under the protection of the 12th Brigade, retreated some 30 miles to Slim River. Now, Colonel Tsuji was reluctant to acknowledge it because, of course, he hates Yamashita, but Yamashita's breakthrough at Campar was impressive, albeit somewhat risky, and Yamashita is known as a gambler. We- Yeah, you about to say
Well, I
something?
mean, Hitler was also a gambler with military strategies.
Yeah, Hitler was the kind of
An
guy
arch
that
gambler.
I would say Hitler's the kind of guy that if he's playing blackjack and he hits a 20, he'll take a hit. He's an idiot. But like
I think the book I was read about the War of the West by James Holland,
yeah.
and he literally describes him as the arch gambler in military sense.
Yeah, no, a lot of ways. And Hitler got lucky. A lot of times he got really lucky, but you can't
Yeah.
win a war on luck alone. So, over on the East Coast, because this is basically everything we're talking about, it's the West Coast, and there's a lot going on in the East. The defenders were facing, more resistance. Percival clung to an airfield at Guantan, determined to deny it to the Japanese, uh, and every other RAF airfields on the peninsula for as long as possible. But this was not for the British to use them because they didn't really have any aircraft. It was just to limit the enemy's ability to, conduct further air raids and have an easier time of it because everything was to protect Singapore. And meanwhile, the first convoy reinforcements was about 24 hours away from Keppel Harbor, coming in from Bombay with fresh Indian forces, originally intended for training in Iraq, actually. They were only half trained and untested. Specifically, it was the 45th Brigade under Brigadier Horatio Duncan. Now, Kuantan lies roughly halfway between Kota Bharu and Singapore. Actually, let me just check the map. Do I have it? Oh, here, I'll just go over here. As you can see, we're actually in the central part of Malaya.
Malaysia.
What? Yeah, Malaysia. I know. I have that thing because it was called Malaya back then. I'm like,
Fair enough.
it's like the Kingdom of Siam. We call it Thailand today. It changed names 3 times in this period. I don't know why they did that, but yeah. So it's about halfway over on the way to Singapore, and the defenders were up against the Takumi detachment of the 18th Division. The 22nd Indian Brigade, led by Brigadier George Painter, was tasked with defending Kuantan. His forces fortified the airfield with barbed wire and trenches, and as Takumi's forces crossed a river and approached the airfield, Painter ordered several men to withdraw further west to set up roadblocks and ambushes. One battalion remained by the airfield, and it was commanded by somebody who had seen some action during the Kota Bharu landings, and the Japanese were met with a barrage of 4.5-inch howitzers, inflicting significant casualties. Cummings.
I believe that was Lieutenant Colonel Arthur Cummings.
Ah, yes, and I think you have some information on him.
Yeah, unfortunately, pictures again for a lot of these folks are hard, but this guy is one brave commander. So he was born in British India, in Karachi, so like Pakistan, but that was British India back then. So at the time of the war, he was commanding the 2nd 12th Frontier Force Regiment of the Army. And, I think on third night, when they made an attack near Kuantan, the Japanese make a huge attack. And this guy, to allow the battalion to safely withdraw, he gathers a party of like a small group of men and, just leads a countercharge. Small group against a larger force to allow his battalion to withdraw. Everyone is casualties, including him. He got like 2 bayonet wounds in his stomach. But the entire battalion was able to end up being withdrawn with its vehicles.
Hmm.
And, he later would be driving in a carrier under very heavy fire and would direct his driver of that carrier to pick up isolated men from the British Indian Army, as they continue the retreat. And this gallantry would earn him the Victoria Cross.
There we go.
Yeah, and he would, I think dresses like, post this campaign. So, not the right place to bring it up.
You're just going to bring back the map. Okay. So, as you said, Cummings' men fought fiercely, firing on the struggling Japanese as they attempted to breach the defenses, each defender equipped with 6 grenades instead of the usual 2, creating a lot of chaos and quite a deadly situation. Tsuji noted that the airfield was defended very well, particularly due to the effectiveness of the grenades thrown during the nighttime, which thwarted Japanese night raids. Defenders reported rolling 2 grenades into confined trenches where multiple enemies were hiding, resulting in devastating effects. Word reached Cummings' men that the entire 9th Indian Division under General Barstow was retreating through Kuala, Lipis, Durantut, Rob's area. So it's multiple areas on the map you can see there. And this prompted the 22nd Brigade to quickly demolish all the buildings and installations in Kuantan and to prepare for their own retreat. But their rearguard risked being cut off in the midst of the Japanese assault. So one night, while investigating his southern flank with Captain Ian Grimwood, Cummings spotted silhouettes of Japanese soldiers attempting to climb over some barbed wire just meters away. Armed with his .45 Webley revolver, which is actually a pretty big gun, the largest caliber service revolver at the time, Cumming and Grimwood realized that
Quite a big bullet.
yeah, it's kind of like Patton with his freaking Colts there. That's the kind of gun there. The Webley revolver, that's a huge gun. Grimwood and Cummings realized the danger when 7 Japanese soldiers charged at them with bayonets, and they began firing at them, probably like Clint Eastwood would, as they were knocked to the ground, killing all the attackers, but leaving Cummings stunned with 2 bayonet wounds to his stomach, which you had already talked about. Grimwood managed to get him to his feet, reload the revolver, and drag Cummings to the battalion HQ for first aid. With the Japanese beginning to overrun the airfield defenses, Cummings knew that they had to evacuate before their escape route was cut off. So he sent word for his men to withdraw, and he was struck by a grenade or possibly a mortar round, knocking him unconscious at some point. When Cummings regained consciousness, he found himself in a vehicle where the driver, Private Abel Singh, informed him a Japanese roadblock was ahead of them. Spotting a fallen tree that created just enough space for the vehicle to pass, Cummings ordered Singh to charge the hell through it. As they sped forward, machine gun fire rained upon them, and Cummings was hit again, suffering a shattered arm, possibly from an anti-personnel mine, while Singh endured a .256 armor-piercing bullet through both thighs. Oh,
Ouch.
yeah. Yet he
Not to
managed.
mention armor piercing.
Yeah, it's going right through.
Back.
Yeah.
No, and it's going to pack more explosive power.
Oh. Yet, still through this, he managed to control and drive 30 miles per hour right through. When they reached a friendly platoon, the vehicle was covered in blood with its 6 occupants. It was a gruesome sight, to be sure. Singh was safely removed from the driver's seat, and Grimwood took over, driving them to the new brigade HQ. By the time they arrived, Cummings was in and out of consciousness, I bet, but he was still alive. He would later receive the Victoria Cross for his heroism, as you had mentioned. Fuck. It's a hell of a story, by the way. That's an interesting one. George Painter was ordered to hold the Kuantan airfield for as long as possible, and it was just long enough for the convoy reinforcements to arrive. The prolonged defense cost much of his best Indian battalions in Malaya. But unfortunately, like many British commanders, Painter was fixated on the fear of being outflanked, believing it was better to lose half of a battalion than the entire brigade, as they would say. The 22nd Indian Brigade lost a third of its strength, but the remainder managed to retreat by January the 3rd.
That sounds like a lot more than half a battalion.
Yeah. Now, while all of this unfolded in the east, Yamashita's forces continued their advance to try and catch the fleeing British defending the south. The defenders were preparing a new line of defenses at Trolloc, about 5 miles north of Slim River. Meanwhile, reinforcements had arrived, that being the 45th Brigade, and they were immediately dispatched to repel the enemy's advance on Kuala Selangor, which was another crucial airfield. But are they going to be able to do so? Because that's where we're going to be ending this episode. I'm just going to stop share screen. It was hard to choose where to end this one because I could have done a neat package and made the last episode Singapore itself, but I think this series needed 4 episodes, so we're going to be covering the rest and in the next episode, and then the last episode will be exclusively on the battle for Singapore. And
that's definitely one I'm really looking forward to.
yes, Singapore's fall is quite interesting. But before we let you go, audience, I just want to reiterate again, if you'd like to further support the channel, please check out the YouTube membership or the Patreon account at www.patreon.com/the Pacific War Channel. By joining either, you get access to the exclusive podcast series, early access to all the content I make, and voting rights for the subjects I will tackle next. Perhaps some of the stuff we talked about here, like amphibious warfare during the Pacific War specifically.
Mongol or a future Mongol series.
A future Mongol series, which I wouldn't feel comfortable because I'm not an expert, but I happen to work with one of the greatest experts in the entire world. He's actually a fellow YouTuber, actually, Jack Meister. If anyone wants to check out his channel, he is incredible. And I don't want to give anything away, but I can't say anything because it's not something very big is coming down the pipeline from him and Kings and Generals. I'll say that much. It's very big. It's very impressive about the Mongol Empire. But stating all of that, thank you, Gaurav, for being a hostage in the brutal jungles of Malaya. Until next time.
A pleasure.